I am fanboy, hear me roar. So I don't have any particular impetus to talk about this particular subject, but it was on my mind today and I thought I'd record some thoughts. And the question occurred to me, how much should creators of entertainment listen to the fans? Because we've entered an era of unprecedented connection between fans of some piece of entertainment and the makers of that entertainment. Thanks to social media, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, we can reach out, if not directly to them, at the very least we can consolidate in a unified voice through social media that is loud enough that they will hear it, even if we can't do a direct one-on-one communication with them. But is it really a good thing? And when I say creators, I don't mean exclusively the original creators, because we live in the age of adaptation. So oftentimes I'm also referring to the people who are adapting an existing piece of media, because they certainly have their ears on what the fans are saying as well. I don't want to say you have to listen to what they want, and I'll go into some of the reasons why maybe you probably shouldn't, but you shouldn't deliberately go out of your way to tick them off. I think really you want to go way back historic. The big case in point, Arthur Conan Doyle was really sick of writing Sherlock, so he killed him. Until the fan outcry was so loud and nothing else he was doing was bringing him much of a paycheck, he just went, fine, I'll bring them back. I mean, the only reason he killed Sherlock wasn't because like he had been building to it. It wasn't his master plan. It wasn't, you know, some part of conclusion of a grand story. It's like, he just was sick of writing it. And so he just killed him off like, there, stop asking me to write more. Here's the problem with fans and with listening to fans. Ask a fan what they want, and what they'll tell you is they want more of the stuff they already love. And that is how you get in basically into, you know, masturbatory nostalgia, where we're just cycling around the same stuff over and over and over again because you ask us what we want and we tell you it's what we already love. Most fans aren't gonna think of the new thing that they don't even know that they will love once you give it to them. So while fan reaction to something that you have done is probably valuable and worth, you know, getting a read on, what is a bad idea is sort of preemptively trying to get a gauge on what fans will think before you've actually done something. And also, fans, we need to understand our place in all this as well, because when we're talking about something like a comic book, a book series, yes, the fans keep it going. But also in a lot of those cases, there are fewer creators involved, and it makes it easier for them to sort of maintain their level of control. Like, I don't think George R.R. Martin gives a dang what any fan thinks about anything that he's writing for these last two books, because it's his, it's 100% his, and he is not beholden to anybody else. The more people get involved, the more voices are like, maybe we did not do that, and, you know, again, you can get the stagnation thing. But as things get into bigger mediums like television, like film especially, we need to understand as fans that we are not enough on our own to make something profitable, especially in the case of a movie. Now, that doesn't mean that our opinions don't matter or shouldn't count, but we need to understand that when you look at the box office for the latest superhero blockbuster, the percentage of that box office that is the fans, I mean like the fans who were fans of this thing before it was even a movie, that's a small percentage of the overall box office. They need the mainstream, who maybe folks who have heard of whatever the thing is, but they're not devoted fans of it. And without them, the thing doesn't become a glorified hit. Now, that doesn't mean fans are irrelevant, because sometimes, you know, if fans are loud enough about this is awful, that can filter out to the mainstream and they go, oh, well, the people who like this thing don't even like this movie. I'm not going to bother with that. So again, it can be a loud and a powerful voice, but raw numbers, we don't wield as much power as we think we do. And yet, especially in the case of movies and television, but movies especially, studios are terrified of fans, which has led to sort of my big bugbear with adaptations lately, which is a fear of actually properly adapting material. Because at this point, I think studios are so desperate to meet fans' approval and so intensely terrified about them crapping all over something and potentially poisoning the minds of the mainstream audience when they do so, that when especially a book gets adapted into a film or a TV show, they change almost nothing. At best, they'll remove a few things to get the runtime down to a reasonable length, but they will change almost nothing. And I'm sure fans will go, well, why isn't that the best thing ever? Why would we want it changed? Well, two reasons. First of all, different things work better in different media. You need to allow for certain embellishments, especially in the case of film. If you've got a filmmaker of any degree of vision, you need to allow them to put their own stamp on it. Otherwise, you're just gonna get completely cookie cutter adaptations of stuff. I like to use the Harry Potter movies as a good example on this. So the first two Harry Potter movies are by far the blandest of the lot. And they're also the most faithful in terms of what they adapt to the screen. They keep the most stuff. They add the least in terms of, things, moments or ideas or character beats that didn't originate in the novels but still make sense. Starting with the third one and going forward, that stuff started to happen more and more, and that in my mind is proper adaptation. Just doing a copy-paste job from a novel to a script and then just filming that and going down a checklist of all the scenes the fans are expecting to see, that's not proper adaptation in my book. That's just a really expensive fan film. Proper adaptation requires tweaking the material so that it works better in the medium you're now telling the story in. This is a big part of why I really have a strong distaste for the Watchmen movie. I know some people like it, but I actually hate for how slavishly faithful it is, because that story was written so specifically to work on the comic book page, and they didn't make the adjustments you need to make it work better on film. And so the film is just an inferior version of the same story because it's not being told in the medium it was designed for. Now, this is actually part of why I have really enjoyed a lot of the superhero adaptations that have happened, because very few of them have been adapting specific storylines directly. They've been pulling from all sorts of influences, but by and large, these films from whatever studio is making them, it's been true of the DCEU movies, it's been true of the MCU, these films are taking a superhero character, and even if they're retelling like the origin, which is a specific story, they're just hitting a couple of beats about it, but then allowing all these things from all these years to seep into it. All these characters across a hero's entire timeline, bringing in villains that probably weren't even around when the character truly had their origin story, and all this other stuff. And that is proper adaptation. That rather than trying to go rigidly, all right, this story here as a movie, they are going, okay, here's the character, here's the essence of this character, here's the essence of their villains, here's the essence of the kinds of stories that they're in. How do we get something that captures all of this? And that's why something like, say, Civil War was so good. Even though it took its title from a very specific storyline from the Marvel Comics and borrowed a couple of key elements from it, it is way different. There's almost no similarity plot-wise in terms of the Civil War comic book and the Civil War movie. They bear a very superficial relationship to each other. And in my mind, that's perfect, because I can recognize the elements where they took the story points, but they've done something new with it. Now, granted, all of that is easier when you are doing comic book, superhero stories specifically, that with comic books that have been ongoing for a very long time and aren't defined by this is the definitive story. It gets harder when you're adapting a specific story, which if you're doing something other than superheroes, that's largely what you're doing. You're adapting a specific story. But do you want to know what kind of movies you get when you allow a filmmaker to take the core ideas and the core characters from a source work but do their own thing completely with it, you get Jurassic Park. You get Jaws. I mean, odds are you've probably seen either or both of those movies. And I didn't mean to pick two Steven Spielberg movies. They both happen to be really good examples of this. But in both cases, the books, very different. And in my personal opinion, the books are not as good. The Jaws book it's kind of a mess, honestly. There's a lot of weird and ugly and messy subplots that the movie just gets rid of. And as far as Jurassic Park goes, the book is a lot more technically minded, and as a result, it kind of loses the thread of just the fun of look at these dinosaurs running around, because it gets kind of hung up on the science, which is something Michael Crichton tended to do. Now, some people do prefer that, but I think whether you prefer the book or the movie of Jurassic Park, you do get the wonderful experience that each is a different experience to have. And both are valid and both are recognizable as being connected to each other. But you don't see the movie and go, well, I don't need to read the book now. No, you can still read the book and get a completely different experience and yet still recognize that it is the same thing. But when you remain slavish to the source material, which is what happens when creators and studios are so scared of fans as they are right now, we just get boring things. I mean, especially for fans. And that's something I will never understand, where fans get overly upset about how much things got changed from the original works. Like, but you've read the book. I mean, do you really want something that is nothing but the thing you already know? I mean, I get the nostalgic value in that, but aren't you going to be bored? And look, having said that not every divergence that ever happens with an adaptation, when they do go their own direction with it, actually works. The Hobbit Trilogy, which I can't stand, took a lot of, it went its own way with it. I won't take that away from it. But boy, it didn't work. But the reason it didn't work is because it lost the heart of the material. The reason the Hobbit films are a really poor adaptation of The Hobbit aren't because of the plot points that got changed, it's because they changed the purpose of it. Because the purpose of The Hobbit, the book, is to follow Bilbo on a fun adventure that he goes on. The purpose of The Hobbit movies is to build up to Lord of the Rings. They're serving completely different functions, and at their heart, they don't have the same mission. They don't have the same intent, and that is what leads to all the other junk about those movies that doesn't work. But at the same time, I have to recognize that if they had done movies that were nothing except exactly what was in the book, I would have been bored. I mean, it's a big part of why the Lord of the Rings movies worked, is because the Lord of the Rings books, they're dry affairs. They read almost like history texts. So to give it that more adventurous feel, the more adventurous vibe, to ditch a lot of the history and the political minutiae and the goings-on of that sort of stuff and people's lineage and all that, to toss that aside and focus on the action and the combat, which is not as prevalent in the novels, that is proper adaptation, because that is the sort of stuff that film does well. So that is where it was correct, by keeping the heart of the story still intact, and it is the journey to take care of the ring. It is the bonding and the stress put on the bonds between these characters, and keeping an eye on that, but putting more of a focus on the action than was in the books, because again, action is a more visceral thing. Film does visceral better than it does the more intellectual expositional stuff, which is all over the novels. And yet, I still know fans of the book who get really upset about specific minutiae details that didn't make the movie. And I get when something that you loved doesn't make the cut. It's disappointing. I've had that happen with stuff that I knew the source material really well before seeing the adaptation. But I will swallow that. I'll go like, would that thing that I wish was there truly have made this adaptation a superior piece of work? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no, not really. It just would have made me happy. So as I said, I really think that creators need to be aware of fan reaction and fan desires to a certain extent, but also not feel that they are beholden to them. Because I think you can see in the way that certain television shows evolve, especially over time, that oftentimes the longer a TV show goes on and the more the fans keep calling for something to happen, eventually it does, and then the show's not as good. I mean, the classic example is just any show that had a will they, won't they, you know, sort of relationship between a male and female character. Once they do, the show isn't the same after that. And it's usually something the fans have been calling for, like, just get them together. And then you do, and it's like, well, what's the point now? Like, you should never do that unless you're about to end the show. You should always be dangling those sorts of things. I mean, it's the reason on Doctor Who I'm putting my foot down. I never want to see a ginger doctor. I want the Doctor wishing to be ginger every single regeneration. If they ever make the Doctor ginger, that should be the last regeneration the Doctor ever gets. Because after that, what more have you got to tease us with? I'm being slightly facetious. I'm kind of exaggerating a very minor point. But it speaks to my overall personal sentiment. So I think I've rambled on and gone tangenty enough for this particular video. So what are your thoughts on any of this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast, also available on iTunes and Stitcher. So until next time, this council is adjourned.